Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week of Tryhard Tuesdays, where we learn to play a little harder. I am your host, the Grand Wazoo. Here with me is my co-host, Mr. Blue 22. How you doing, Blue?
I'm good. Hello, everyone.
It is good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
Feels like it's been so long since we've been on this show, but it really hasn't. I think the Thanksgiving weekend, when you start to get around family and stuff, it's just like every day feels like 3 days or something.
Yes.
I feel
Time
like
slows down. You get worse at Dota magically.
Magically, dude.
The turkey, man. I think it's the turkey.
It's a lot of things, I think. I think it's the stress from, like, you try to sneak in a little Dota when you can. Like, you might watch the Jiffy Cat stuff, just little GIFs. Like, you start on day one, that's what you're looking at, and then you're reading, like, the subreddit, and then it's just like you're like shaking and you're like, I don't have a problem, I need to sneak, I need to go do some work, and then you sneak a game in or something.
Yeah. Or you're like or you go on the Reddit and it's like that won't even satiate you. They're talking too much about like bullshit drama that went on like outside of the game. I'm like, I don't even care about that. Like, just give me more things that are like related to the game, you know? So
yeah, exactly. And it feels like finding those sources is difficult sometimes. So I've taken to like watching Let's Plays and stuff of heroes I'm interested in.
yeah.
And it's a good time. It's interesting how this game kind of moves in cycles for me. It starts like a really intense interest, and then it moves into like, I'm going to be the best that I can be, like fairly quickly. It's very addictive for me. And then when like I finally reach like a level where I realize I'm probably peaking for the amount of hours I put in, it's just like I get dissuaded. It just want to like reformat my idea of the game better.
It's the ebb and flow of Dota. I was feeling that a lot around like right after TI5. That's why I like made the new account. Sometimes it's just like it's refreshing to feel like you have a clean slate to go off of, and that like your style or whatever is kind of just wiped off the map, right? And like you can just do whatever you want to do in that. And like at least the first like 20 games or so, when you're just stomping people who are actually new to the game, you like feel like whatever you're doing is working.
Sounds like a feeding frenzy every time I hear someone describe like having another account. But
and it's horrible to say, like it's not something that people should do, but it is something that like I have to admit it was kind of refreshing. This is one of those like, do not try this at home, kids. Please don't do this because like you're the worst if you do this, and I know I'm the worst because I do this, or I did do it. But yeah, it was like, I don't know. It was just something that was like I took like a Dota sabbatical, and just like explored my horizons with it, and it was a lot of fun to do. But yeah, we'll have a whole. I think in this upcoming month or so, since you and I both have kind of hit that like Dota rut, where we don't necessarily have enough time to do what we want with it because of life stuff, but we also want to stay interested and stay connected to the scene, like thinking of different ways to approach how you do that outside of playing ranked matchmaking. So I think we're going to have an upcoming episode on that. But today we're talking all about our favorite guy to beat up on, and that's Roland, right?
Big Ro, but not the land. Roshan is who.
Roshan.
Yeah, Roland's second. I love that Aegis, and I love that cheese, man. It's just so tasty. It's incredible. It leads to victories. So we thought we'd do an entire episode on Roshan, and when you would go after an objective such as that. We're going to go into kind of a little bit of the background, and then we'll talk mechanical stuff with Gorgon a little later on in the episode. He will be joining us. So, Blue, what do you need to be a successful Rosher? We see people call or say that they're going to call Roshan early on. They're going to go kill him. What exactly do you need in a hero to make him successful at such an objective?
Well, I think to me, I don't know. It starts with what value are you going to get out of the Roshan at that time of the game, right? I mean, there's a lot of heroes that you can pick simply that will take Roshan quickly, and yes, that always gives an inherent advantage. But if you don't have like a team that knows, like, okay, this guy's picking Ursa, he's going to get a Rosh pretty damn early, like at the 8-minute mark or something or sooner. Let's take advantage of this. If that team isn't built to do something with that advantage early on, then it isn't necessarily a great Rosh pick. It isn't a great hero to take it at that time. But I don't know. To me, it's someone who typically, is okay dying in a fight and coming back and has kind of low cooldown abilities that can impact team fights in a significant way, usually by dealing damage. And so that's why you see heroes like Ursa, why you see heroes like Huskar, why you see heroes like your PAs or your legions or your Lycans going early on into the Rosh
to an
pit.
extent.
Yeah, Juggernaut with the healing ward, that thing is so
some
good.
type of sustainability and durability. Definitely, some of these builds require you to buy a Lifesteal Mask, a Mask of Madness, or something like that, or have Lads, or something like that, Helm of the Dominator, etc. It's interesting because some heroes have that built in kind of already, or they don't take enough damage sometimes, or they can tank with wolves. Like Lycan, you still need the Vlads for sure, but it's because you have other units. And there's a big distinction there. I think there's heroes that can handle Roshan by other units, and they don't want to tank many hits, or they can tank at least a few hits. And then there's those that just kind of tank him out, like, and they have like the ward like Jug, or like how PA would deal with it, although she's like tanking through her blur kind of. So it's just interesting to see that like a lot of these heroes that are built for that man fight are also good at Roshan if it's done at the correct time. And if you can grab that advantage early, it does help.
Yeah, it's true. And it's not necessarily that the guy who is good at taking the Rosh is the guy you want to be carrying the Aegis, but sometimes it works out that way, but you look at other heroes that are just terrible at taking Roshan, but are among the best at taking the Aegis. Number one for me as a Filthy Storm picker in the past is Storm Spirit.
Yeah, even Ember to an extent.
Yeah, Ember. These are guys with low cooldown abilities who can impact a team fight right away. Whether it's early on in the fight, midway through. They have abilities that allow them to constantly do damage and impact the fight. So maybe it's not the best to shove the Aegis onto your support Earthshaker. But those two are probably among the best to take it with. I'm trying to think of some others who are really, really good. It used to be that Razor was good before they had the patch where his ultimate would stop.
Oh yeah.
Right? Isn't that before it'd be like you would kill him, but his ultimate continued through it. He came back and it's like nothing ever changed. And then there's other heroes that like previously were extremely good Aegis carriers who aren't that way as much anymore. And I think Slark is another one of them where if you get a bunch of agility steal and you die, I think it gets rid of the agi gain. I'm not sure about that, but I'd have to look that one up.
Even with an Aegis death, I wonder if it does, honestly. Yeah,
this sounds like a Gorgon question. But,
yeah, definitely. We'll mark that down to talk to him later.
Yeah.
For me, it's very interesting that you bring that up because there are heroes in the game designed to be at the center of a fight, but kind of how it's built into the complications of the hero is that they're not really supposed to die. With a Slark, if you go Shadowblade, like you should be getting out of any fight and regenning to go engage. Mm-hmm. So like even now, like he's not the best carrier for it, but I feel like maybe he was at another time when meta was even different. So like there's the patch and everything as well, and like where the pit was located and like those heroes over time. But the meta's also changed dramatically, it feels like, in terms of trying to sneak that without like at least having like some people there to support you. You either have the rotated supports or anything. Like it's kind of pubby to just like sneak into Rosh and do it. And typically you'll get caught, I feel like, in pro level play. Like they'll sneak by, they'll have it warded, or they'll figure it out. They know those timings well enough that they know when to check it with that hero on the map. But
yeah, it's true, but at the same time, it is something that like, especially at lower levels, I would put this anywhere under 4K, is that you could get away with taking a Rosh because by the time they figure it out, trying to assemble, how many times have we gone, even like in our coordinated pubs, where there's at least, you know, three or four people on our team, we've said, oh yeah, they're probably taking Rosh now, and as someone says that, it's like, and they've taken it.
Yeah.
Or guys, we gotta smoke up before we go in there. Oh, let's go. We gotta smoke. You know, it forces a coordinated action from the enemy team, which just they may not be capable of at that time, right? Someone may have just TP to the very most top lane, you know, 5 seconds after or before someone says, oh, let's go contest Rosh. You know, and then it's like, well, now we're fighting 4v5. He's got to walk all the way back here.
Yeah.
You know, just like stuff like that happens all the time. So it kind of like, the way I see Rosh is that if you have a lineup that can take it pretty fast, that is one of the biggest advantages, is that it forces the other team to play well. It's like, there's no other way I can say it. Like, it forces the other team to play in a coordinated fashion, quickly, with a quick decision maker and people following along to really contest it.
Yeah, those calls need to be made quick, and we've talked about this a lot in the show. And that's not like by the time it feels like teams call that stuff, you should be doing it by that point, you know, and everyone needs to be together and smoking into the Rosh or just walking in there if there's no wards. So I feel like that's something we miss out on our level, is that level of coordination where everyone can kind of know that timing and be good to go. Because there's some teams you can just take it from, and then there's some teams that if they catch you, they'll kill you, you know, and you'll be super behind. It's way more of a risk with some team lineups. Like, if you haven't collected the Aegis yet, and there's like a Tide Hunter in the mix, or someone like with really big ults, black holes, etc., like, you can really fucking throw away an advantage that you have to that point and go into the mid game super behind. And at that point, it was not worth it, and it was a wrong call. Like, fighting around the pit, which is what I kind of want to talk about in the middle leg of the show after we've discussed the type of hero and compositions it needs, is it's one of those defining events in Dota. I you know, say it's akin to taking high ground in how serious of a decision it should be, because if you lose a fight there and then you get the Rosh taken, it's huge. You know, if they give it to the right person, it's the tactical advantage that you sought wasn't even that big, that you just kind of gave up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because now they have all the kills as well.
It's like one of those, like, you know, it's part of like what should be like the Dota Bible, is that like you fight near objectives, right? That's one of the key ones, is if you're behind, fight for an objective. You know, fight for a very important objective. Too many people go, we need to defend this tier, you know, this tier 1, you know, off lane, you know, radiant tower, and they'll just constantly like throw their bodies over and over and over at it. And it's like, that's not an objective that's worth fighting over. Yeah. But then you talk about, you know, a tier 3, or you know, them trying to break high ground, or an important tier 2, which could lead to, you know, a Rosh, an easy Rosh for them.
Some people don't have that objective, like, rating. Yeah. Like, they don't look... I am one of these players. I'm guilty of this. I will say that here, live and on the air, although we're neither of those things, although we were going to be. Tune in later for, like... That's a shameless plug. But what I'm saying is, you... Like, we were talking with Nahaz about how you cut the map in half, right? You know?
Yeah.
And the Roshan side is naturally more advantageous to have because you have that renewable resource. But you shouldn't be treating a tier 1 tower like you should be treating a tier 2 tower or even a tier 3 tower. And so to treat it like that, or to treat a fight in Roshan like feel like you can't give up an Aegis, like I kind of view like getting an Aegis like getting kind of an extra tower, you know? And so like you haven't given up a tier 1 but you take an Aegis, like it's not okay to go and like sacrifice all your guys for that if you know you can't win the fight. You got to just incrementally let go of these small things early on in the game, even if it won't put you in a good like position. You want to be throwing your bodies at people when they go up high ground though, because that's when you have the biggest tactical advantage.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The holding on to, you know, the like to among those rules is, you know, fighting your objectives, and this plays into Roshan because, you know, you won't have to have this, but save for buybacks if they're trying to go for a high ground, if you feel like they could, you know, or spend your money before you die. That's usually early on in the game, but it's something that, you know, everyone at every level struggles to do all three of those things all the time. If you do all of those, you know, all the time, there's a very good chance you're going to climb. in terms of ranked
Yeah.
matchmaking, right?
On the subject of Roshan, though, and the towers that I think are most important, I think they're definitely those bottom lane towers, Radiant safe lane and Dire off lane. I mean, once those are cut off, it's a little harder to get to the pit on either side. Maybe not as hard for Radiant because they just cut through the jungle anyway, but you're still closer teleporting there than you are teleporting tier 2 for Radiant. But when those are captured and knocked out, it's like if you know they're roshing, it'll take a long time for you to port from wherever you are to that tower and walk all the way across. With the good Rosh lineup, they've already cleared him, and then you've wasted all the resources to get to the bottom, and then they just back out through Dire or wherever.
Yeah, it is the dire side advantage, and yes, Radiant can get a little sneaky with it, but again, this is assuming that let's say your tier, your outer towers are down on the Radiant side and your Radiant safe lane. That means that they very well may have warded your jungle, right? So you can't smoke into your jungle; you have to smoke even farther back.
Yeah.
And that adds up. Those are precious seconds, especially when you have those. When you're going up against those teams that have really good Rosh taking lineups. Like I've seen a lot of guys lately go for stuff like TA plus Slardar plus Alchemist. Just all the negative armor in the world, and that's just it's so good to have. And then you even just get say a Rubik or someone that picks up a medallion, and you just insta-give that Rosh. I mean, it takes, 15 seconds, whereas if you had someone like a Gyrocopter, plus an Omni Knight, or, someone who just doesn't take Roshes quick.
You're in there shooting peas at his head for a half an hour before he goes down.
And the thing is that has like a mental toll on you. The more time you spend in it, the more worried you get,
Yeah.
It's that Jaws feeling. Like even if you feel like you're safe, like you're on your little life raft within the Rosh pit, you just know they could be smoking, even if you have ward coverage,
And so yeah, I get what you're saying exactly. Just to finish the point, like, and how we've related it past in the show for you, is like there are these mental checklists you're talking about that when you're going through your jungle and you're about to smoke up, that tower's taken, and so you can assume based upon your experience with the game that there'll be a ward up there. And I think a lot of people don't. They don't look at that 1 or 0 like we've talked about. It's like yes or no, is all we're talking about. And you have this binary system built where if what you're doing is wise or not. And maybe they see you smoke, and by the time you get there, they're just waiting for you outside, and then you just take a terrible fight, And that happens so much. And this will kind of help with the reinforce our, structure of the show with the whole positioning mess, because it feels like a lot of people panic when they get taken in Rosh, and some teams it's okay to fight near the pit. Some teams it's not okay. You just got to get out, and some teams you can maybe even take the Rosh in time. Like there's times I saw a game earlier with EE as Ember, and like you said earlier, or I said earlier, Ember is not a good one to take Rosh alone. Like at really any stage of the game. I mean, he has his like Flame Guard, but it's not good enough. Like
No.
Even if he has like Vlad's or something, I don't know. I don't even know if he builds that.
No.
Yeah.
The short answer, no.
Yeah, I didn't see it. So it's just interesting. Some heroes, like you view them as strong heroes, meta-changing heroes, but they can't even do that late game, really. I mean, maybe if you're super far ahead, because Roshan does grow every few minutes, but
not even that.
It's every 3 minutes, isn't it? Or 4 minutes?
In terms of his growth, I don't have the exact mechanics. I should. I was just looking.
We'll talk to Gorgon. I'm
earlier
sure
today.
Yes.
When in doubt,
mechanical.
We'll talk to Gorgon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean, and you're right. It is something that people have to consider, and I think. Do we want to? We've talked about strategies to keep in mind when you're either contesting for it or you're going for it. Things to keep in mind. And we briefly touched on it, but we talked about guys who are good at taking Rosh, but what about guys who are good around the pit? To me, I look at a hero that's great around the pit, and the first one that comes to mind is Undying.
Oh yeah.
Right, you put up a tombstone, you get a decay in the pit. There's a very good chance you hit at least 3 heroes.
I'd put him in that category that I spoke of briefly earlier, and that's the big ult heroes like Tide and definitely Undying, and people like that have these ults that have a good amount of cooldown, but they are really durable too, and they can just kind of get in your face. And when you're roshing, that's the last thing you want is someone bashing on you as well, because the odds are you're doing it at a stage in the game to take a risk like that you're probably not good to be teamed up on, or your team at least doesn't want to take a fight. Whoever wants to take a fight in the pit? That's kind of why I like playing Jug, because someone will run in and then you'll just a support will check you and then you'll see them and then you'll just Omni and get a kill sometimes, And it's just because they scout you, but they don't think of that ability that you have. But some teams can fight from being Roshan'd easier than others, And I think there's heroes like Jakiro and stuff like that if you get a good ice path off and you're warded well, that's enough time to just dip around the side and just bail out.
Yeah, there's a lot of those heroes that can that aren't great, necessarily at contesting a Rosh, but are great at buying time. So like a Tusk, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's
even
great example.
A Disruptor, just to glimpse back whoever was going to initiate or was moving into the pit to initiate. Just guys who just kind of face check people, and just buy you time. Fissure from an Earthshaker, even someone like, I don't know, a Spirit Breaker, if you know that it is more important that you get that Aegis and you get everyone else out, doing the old suicide charge, and bashing a couple of people along the way to buy some time is worth it. There's a lot of those kind of heroes who are just kind of the ultimate space creators, and that pit area is the perfect example of where they can make that space. A puck in the pit.
It is the fighting pit. Out. It really is the fighting pit, and I feel like that's another kind of meta observation is interesting fights break out around the Roshan pit, and sometimes they're devastating fights for one team, but it's also where a team can kind of catch up if they leverage the fight correctly. I feel like a lot of teams don't know when to, players at our level anyway, not a lot of teams competitively. Let me make that distinction. That they can't let go, much like they can't let go of tier 1 towers. They can't let go that Rosh isn't meant to happen at that moment. And so maybe the Jakiro will land the ice path and cut them in half, but they're still beating on it, and it's at half health. And you're just no, dude, we got to get out of here, or we're dead. And they don't understand that it's okay to leave that objective and even lose it, rather than give up wipe your entire team getting something that or trying for something you can't get anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It is hard, and you know what the thing is. We were talking about going through that checklist of things, whether you're contesting or trying to take the Rosh. And I think what a lot of people, at our level and below and sometimes above, I've seen is this: they go through the mental checklist, and it's they've checked maybe 3 out of the 5, and the 2 that they didn't check are ones that they realize could be a problem, but they're well, maybe they're just trying to push tier 2. I saw them, 10 seconds ago in the top lane. Maybe they're still just trying to push that wave out. Let me just hope that they do that. And if you find yourself in your head saying those things, more than one time in your little checklist, there's a good chance that whatever decision you're going to make is not going to be the right one if you're going to be aggressive about it. Oh, I'll stay in the pit. They're probably just pushing top lane. No, I'll stay in the pit. I think I saw a ward. A ward may have spotted their carry.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he's got boots of travel. It's he doesn't give a shit about wherever he is on the map.
It's kind of interesting because I feel like this is a hyper aggressive meta at the pro level, and I think people watch a lot of pro Dota now, and so that hyper aggression, like we talked about last week, is how the meta kind of bleeds in, as people are all of a sudden not playing safe because they see these pros doing all this wacky, awesome shit, but what they don't realize is that's a way higher level of skill, and most of the time in Dota, it's not a good thing to be overly aggressive. It's a very bad thing, and you can get punished for it very easily. Even just not talking on a broad level, even just in lane, if you're too aggressive at points, you die, and it's a punishing game that we've all grown very familiar with on that point. So I don't know. I think looking at Rosh as an objective and just looking at him like a tower really helped me objectify him in a way. You know what I mean? Sorry, Roshan, but just looking at him as kind of just an objective and looking at that.
It's just a hunk of meat, huh?
Yeah, I mean he's just a cheeser Aegis to me.
God, you're a pig.
Yeah, it's okay.
How do you live with yourself?
I get by okay. Is the truth.
I play Lycan and I play Sven, and I
Yeah.
take Roshan many a time.
That's it. Like he's just another tower to me, pretty much.
So I
And
have a question. I'm going to turn
it's
it
just in
back
a weird
around on you.
location. Okay.
I'm going to turn it back around on you because you are a guy who has played his fair share of Lycan. You are a guy who does the solo Rosh thing a lot. Do you find that your teammates, let's just say, what do you like the 3K and up level? Do you find your teammates are really? Do they know what to do? Let's say you took the Rosh, right? You did your thing. You got your Vlads real quick. You took the Rosh. Does your team out of the gate? Do they know very often what to do with that, or do you
I
know
like
what
that
to
you're
do with
asking me
that,
this
right?
question because there's more of a meta addition in this situation than there is actually a physical one. When I Rosh with Lycan at like 9 or 10 minutes, like I'm not great at it. I get my Vlads at like 8 minutes and I'm like, woohoo, pro level, like I don't know. I feel really good about that. And that's just like an average time from what I believe. So like if I can get in by like 9 minutes or something, smoke in and everything, usually I'll have a belt of strength or something because I've been farming well enough and building towards the treads. And I'll just smoke in. I'll wait for everyone to go by that looks like it. So like I'll wait for a good time and I'll just smoke in, summon wolves, and just beat the shit out of them and take the Aegis. And what typically happens is people will like criticize me even as I'm doing it, and like a wolf will get bashed out and it'll be like noob Lycan, and it's just like da-na-na-na, starts in my head, da-na-na-na-na. And when I finish it, like those people are more likely to listen to me or see the worth, you know what I mean? And so when I'm like now let's go push a tower, they're more likely to listen. But people don't, like when you die with the Aegis, people just bail on you in my pubs at least. Like they don't stick around, like they don't remember anything about you. So it's like just trying to make sure you take a good engagement and like leveraging that Aegis, and also taking down the Aegis time is when it fades is okay. I don't do that personally, but I've seen players do it, and that way you have more control over it. You know how long until you need to use it.
Yeah, we really got to do that more, and I think everyone is. There's a lot of people who are guilty of that, and ourselves included. Just it's so easy to do. It's just put that in your chat wheel, the current time, and then you add 8 to 11 minutes on top of that, and that's when you will be good to go. That's when you can check it again. And there's so many times where like, I feel like it happened 5 minutes ago. Might have been 7, and that could be the difference in a game.
It really is. If you can just keep poking in and taking him time after time after time, like that team isn't looking at that as a resource. They're looking at it as something that like if they're so far ahead, they'll take it. And you can't look at it that way because it is one of those incremental things. On the flip side, you should look at it that way in some other games. You know what I mean? Like if you can't possibly get in for like a Sand King, Tide Hunter, Winter Wyvern,
Wombo
Enigma.
combo.
Yeah, like lineup. I know I named off like a bunch of like utilities and supports, so that would never happen. But heroes like that can just like wreck your day with an ult. Wyvern's a good example. Like turning everyone on the guy that's Roshing in your team, and then the Roshan bashes him and shit as well. Like you don't want that going down. Like you want the situation to be under control. And so if you can't find control until the late game, then you just need to win fights and hopefully transition into that area and have your team together. A lot of people don't know how to like roll off a one fight and go take objectives, but we covered that in our like tower pushing shit. So that's kind of what we mean. Win a fight, have good positioning, have good vision up, and then you can take objectives like that.
Yeah, I like what you talked about the Aegis in that like you die and your team's just like, oh well, fight's over. It's over, guys.
And then you come up between like an invoker, like Tide Hunter again, fuck it, and like an Ember, and they're just like going back to base with like half health and half HP, and you're just like, thanks guys. They don't look at it the same way,
Yeah, on the flip side, it's you like panicking BKB with like 400 HP left, and they just immediately burst you down, and it's like, and shit.
Or the classic, it's like the cartoon running off the cliff and like realizing there's no ground behind you and looking down. Would you like BKB wolf mode and then die like right after? It's terrible. It really is one of the worst feelings in Dota. You just pop like everything and you're like, maybe, and then you die and it's all just wasted.
I feel like that's even a bigger problem than getting people to take Rosh now, is because all of the heroes that we've talked about, over the last few weeks that are so in meta are really additionally great heroes at taking Rosh. I mean, even Bounty Hunter, which was talked about as like a high win percentage hero, partially because Pilot Eye is so damn good with it, but he was a really high win rate hero, and Frankfurt, that's another guy who's a very natural Solar Crest carrier. Slardar, obviously. Even Doom with the Alpha Wolf, and maybe he picks up Vlad's and the Scorched Earth for the sustain. These are all guys who collectively take a Rosh very quickly, and you're seeing that these are becoming much more popular heroes in pubs as a result of Frankfurt. So the issue isn't necessarily taking the Rosh. I've seen it's getting people to use it the right way. It's getting people to stick around and say, like, treat this Aegis as like a reset button on the fight. Like, so what if he used his Tide ult? So what if he killed like one of our supports? I'm coming back. I still have all my shit, and they just blew their wad on us, So like, we can take this again, and getting people not to panic when they see the massive AoE abilities, the Winter Wyvern ult plus Tidehunter. And people don't realize that it's like those are bullets in their chamber, right? And they just spent them.
They don't realize that just canceling the Aegis out, if that's all that happens, and maybe like your support dies, but he got his shit off, like that's a fight you should take. Like, if the Aegis, if you're number one guy, your strength hero or whatever that has the big, like, a considerable advantage. And sometimes the Lycan, going back on that, is like a brief sub note. Sometimes it's not the best even for him to have it. I've noticed at that like early game. Like, you can push the shit out of things, but if you want to be taking fights or something, it's all right to give it up to the mid or someone else, like the carry if you're in jungle. So that's just like a sub note. But what I'm gonna say about the other point, what were we talking about again? Sorry.
We were talking about like how best to make to use the Rosh. How best to, once you've taken it, how do you wield it? How do you get your teammates?
You use it as like having a good hand in poker, pretty much. And if you have that +1 and a life, and you bully in, you punch in on tier 1s, you can take a bunch of them. But what happens that goes wrong is people just get too full of themselves, and they'll chase past the tower, and then they'll snag the Aegis out or something like that and win a fight. And that's like 2 fights almost if you play it really well. You're like 2-to-1 strong in a way. And you just have to leverage that, like you have a good hand in poker or something, and you are capable of bullying people out of hands, if you know what that means. If not, like, just like making sure people can't check you. You know what I mean? And if you use that just to take tower, that aggression, that's good. And then you back up. But if you use it too much, and this works with tier 2s, but the positioning is more important, I think, than it is with tier 1s in that early game Rosh. You can really punch in and take tier 1s pretty easy, believe me. Like, it's a lot easier than it looks if everyone just focuses the objective down real quick.
That's the key, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the thing is looking at it as like taking that small advantage and running with it, running to another place and taking the next objective.
Yeah, but that's hard. I want to get my next item. Let me farm their jungle.
Would you believe me, my son, if I told you that it would be quicker to punch in and take the objectives for you to get that item than going to the jungle right now? Because
I see gold in front of me, and you're not letting me have it. I want to get my next item.
This is like when you work in a call center or something and they have you read the script. It's like your customers will be, I don't know. It's just like, that's the thing about Dota. Hopefully teams can believe in themselves after you've like shown some track record of success. And like, if teams don't want to like play along as a team, there's not a lot you can do. You can't like force a person to do anything. So I've had guys like that. Like, I had a bristleback that was so intent on solo farming, like all game, and it's like, dude, please come fight with us. It's like 4v5. I was like a mid tiny, and I just got my ags, and I'm like, let's go take some towers, and he wouldn't, man. He just farmed and then got wrecked in the late game. So like, you have examples, and like how you pin this back to Rosh is people that Rosh at the wrong time and won't give it up, and then they die and they're like, noob team, and it's like, nah, man, it was a bad idea. Sorry. Like, and those bad ideas can trail into further bad ideas.
Oh yeah, it's so hard to bail from a Rosh, especially when you've gotten him low and you know that it's just a free Rosh for them. But you take that fight and you just double down on the damage that you've done,
Yeah.
And it's so hard that's something that we struggle with as a team, like walking away from the pit, mid fights and stuff like that. And we talked about it, I think maybe 6 or 7 episodes ago, where we had like a fight where like half our team was like, no, we're gonna take the Rosh, fuck them, and the other half of the team is like, no, we're gonna fight him, we have to fight him, we have to ride out and meet him. and you're like, no, I want to stay in here. I want to take this goddamn thing.
It's
And
just
when,
the
like,
stubbornness. It's the same
yes,
stubbornness as when you don't give up the tier 1. I mean, we talked about that earlier, and I definitely agree with you. It's that commitment, that overcommitment, and that unwillingness to break from previous habits. I mean, in a way. But
yeah, and you don't want to give an inch, right? Like
yeah,
it's
exactly.
not because you like think that going out and fighting them is necessarily a bad idea. It's just that you think that's a higher value, that getting the Rosh quicker is of higher value and lower risk. And that's the problem with a game like Dota, is that it truly can be a matter of perspective. And if you're not on the same page as your teammates, then it's a problem. And that's why it circles back to that point I was making earlier, where like at our levels, if you have a hero that can take a solo Rosh, take it all the time, because it's going to force them to coordinate their play, and there's a very good chance that they're not going to be able to do that, and it puts the onus on them
Yeah,
to do that, right?
I definitely agree with you. That's a great way to wrap up this segment. So we kind of went over like the technical stuff that we like to do, or now we're going to go over mechanical stuff with Gorgon. He will be on the show coming up, and we will see you guys in just a few minutes after we come back. Welcome back, everybody. I am here with Blue, didn't lose him along the way, and Gorgon joins us for the last part of the show. Gorgon, good to have you on the show.
It's my pleasure to be back.
Once again, just like Blue, I was saying, it feels like these times of break, or like even just detaching from Dota for a few days, feels like such a big break sometimes, when it feels like such a big part of your day, and like seeing family kind of puts that, I don't know, deep freeze on me. How about you?
It was weird maybe to not be working, because I'm usually working Dota all the time, right? But I actually don't. I go through long periods without playing, a week or 2 weeks on occasion, so it's not that weird for me, but it is weird to not be writing about it. That's really the day-to-day thing that I do a lot, so.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We've plugged some of your articles, and Blue, we wanted to talk about more of the Roshan mechanical decisions. We kind of talked about him being more of an objective, how we look at him as taking an objective, kind of, and how you do that, and we kind of set that up in the first half of the show. So I'm much going to let you lead the conversation with how you want to go in the last half. So what's your former memories of Roshan? How do you feel about him? What do you find interesting about his kind of dynamic quality in Dota 2?
So, there are a couple of interesting points about Roshan. One of those points is that the way he is put into the game, specifically like his location on the map, gives a great deal of pacing control to one team or the other team, depending on whether you're talking pre 6.82 or post 6.82 Dota. So for people who started playing within the last year, you won't remember, but Roshan used to be located in a slightly different spot, slightly to the north and slightly to the west. And that area was much easier for Dire to control, because it gave better anchor points for teleportations in for Rosh fights, which make a big difference at high level of play, right? Maybe down at lower level of play, you don't have that many buybacks in the Rosh fights, but at higher levels of play, because it is an objective and such an important one, usually you'll end up seeing Rosh fights lead to buybacks and lead to extended fights where possible, right?
Yeah,
So,
we didn't really discuss that much at all, is the buyback leverage to try to stop that Rosh from being taken. And it's probably just because we don't see it a ton, like you said. But at high levels of play, it's a pretty good trade to be able to trade a buyback and deny a Roshan. I mean,
oh yeah, for sure.
it's 1-to-1. You know what I mean? Like it's a good buy if you can make it happen. But that's the expertise, is knowing when you can definitely make that happen.
I mean, even think of it this way. Like, don't consider the Aegis at all. Just consider that there is an area on the map that you're guaranteed to have a fight. And that area of the map, for a long time, was very heavily Dire advantage control. They could teleport into their tier 1 and with a Blink Dagger be at that fight again after a buyback. That is functionally very important. Even if the Aegis weren't a factor, which it is, you're still talking Dire side is going to be able to throw 7 or 8 heroes into a fight, and Radiant side's only going to be able to throw 5. So that's just a numbers advantage for a potential swing fight. Up until 6.82, more than 60% of games, every patch universally, more than 60% of games gave Dire 100% of Aegises.
Interesting.
So that in professional Dota, that's not pub Dota. So
Sure.
when 6.82 landed, that started to creep down. It was down to a little bit less than 50% when 6.84 was about halfway through, which is the last time I ran those numbers. Radiant, by contrast, has been creeping up a little bit. They were about 35% of games they had uncontested control of Aegises. But the distinction here is that if Radiant has uncontested control of Aegises, their win rate is almost 100%. It's up about 98% win rate. If you are on Radiant side and you control every Roshan take, you win the game, basically.
I mean, it makes sense from like I don't know, just a ebb and flow of the game kind of representation, because if you're controlling that area, you're controlling a good half of the map if you're Radiant side. I mean, you've cut the map effectively in half, and you're not letting anyone pass that point. To kind of illustrate what Gorgon is saying, the Roshan pit used to be like right by Dire tier 1 mid.
Yeah,
like it was just slightly down.
Touching it. It was
yeah.
from those trees that are by the Dire side tier 1. It was basically touching those trees.
So
yeah, right
even
near
just
the secret shop.
Yeah, exactly. So even just as and there used to be that little secret shop divot that you could step in and buy things from the secret shop.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, that's as easy to get in as just like someone looks like they're checking a rune, and then they like smoke or something, and they're in, and they just take it already. It was overpowered for Dire heroes, very much.
So I have a question actually based on the stats that you gave, which are fascinating. Is I'd like to know what a good percentage is for like a Radiant team, even if they don't have the advantage, right? Maybe they've only taken 1 out of the 3, Aegises. Is that still a good odds for them to win the game? Because to me the numbers, those numbers, you could argue like, well, if they're taking 100% of the Aegises, that means they've already had momentum. You can make that kind of correlation, causation argument. But I'd wonder what's a good percentage if I'm on Radiant and I know, hey, we took 2 out of 5. Is that good? What is that? What would you, if you had to kind of extrapolate the numbers or take a guesstimate, what's a good ratio?
So if you control as much as your opponent on Radiant, you're good. So if you split 1 and 1, statistically you are still more likely to win than your opponent. Okay. If you split 2 and 2, you're still more likely to win, or if you're positive, right? In fact, Radiant, when I ran these numbers back midway through 6.84, Radiant still had a pretty significant win rate when they were down in Aegis. If they took 1 and their opponents took 2, Radiant still won the same amount that Dire would, right? So that is by itself very interesting to know.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of the most significant reasons for that is because Dire has better access to the Roshan pit. What that means is that when Radiant takes a fight there, they are already primed to push into the lane. So think about Roshan as a guaranteed team fight, right? You're almost always going to have contesting happen at that pit if the game is at all close. So you have a team fight, and if you get the Aegis, you usually won that team fight, which means that your opponents are dead. Now, if you are Dire side, you still have to push a lane out and up the high ground, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're on the Radiant side, if you've got into that pit in order to contest, it usually means one of your lanes is pushed out at least to the river. Just because of the ebb of the game, you're not going to typically be able to go contest Roshan while all your lanes are pushed in.
Yeah.
So, as Radiant, you're much more likely to have lanes pushed into your favor at the end of that fight, which means it's harder for Dire to convert an Aegis into a tower or into a high ground than it is for Radiant.
Just by nature of positioning.
By the nature of the positioning. So while Dire does have an advantage in terms of securing Aegises, they still secure more Aegises than Radiant do. Radiant have a much better positioning overall, because even if they give up the Aegis, they're not going to be usually giving up objectives on the back of that Aegis. So it's much more important for Dire to defend Roshan than it is for Radiant to take it, basically.
By nature of that positioning, it almost feels like it's a more defensive thing to take a Rosh as well as Dire in
Yeah.
that sense. That it, like you said, it's better to kind of use that to hold an objective if you can't push it out. And whereas Radiant, it's more of a left to right thing where it's a more aggressive action to have to go onto that other side.
It really is. So for Dire, basically, if you are a Dire side team and you do not have a strong ability in order to take Roshan, we're talking some negative armor, usually a Medallion of Courage purchased on one of your supports, you are playing at a disadvantage, basically. The Radiant doesn't have as heavy of a burden to take that because it's just harder to convert into a high ground. So Radiant have a more streamlined jungle process, which means even if they are down in Aegis, they are usually still going to be able to farm a little bit at higher levels of play. They're not going to be as easy to starve out. And most importantly, an Aegis isn't going to immediately turn into objectives lost for Radiant. So they have a lot more leeway in terms of control. And it shows that the constant nerfs to Dire side, both in the map movement and the difficulty in taking Roshan, making it harder for Roshan to fall, which makes it harder for Dire to sneak a Roshan based on their positional advantage relative to the pit, shows the amount of Aegises have been steadily declining since 6.82.
That's interesting.
I'd actually like to follow up on that because, we've talked about Roshan getting really buffs constantly since 6.79 or really since it started. But do you think that with the we've talked a lot about up to 6.84 and the statistics going into it. We've talked about a lot of meta heroes the last few weeks. Slardars, our Dooms, our even Templar Assassin has been a popular pick. These are all heroes that can take Rosh pretty well. If you had to surmise, would you guess that the numbers have they continued to drop in terms of the amount of Dire teams taking Rosh, or has it kind of flatlined a little bit because of and also new items like Solar Crest and stuff have kind of helped make a Rosh taking lineup when there wasn't one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would speculate that the numbers have continued to drop. I don't know that for sure because I have not run the numbers. But there's no reason for me to believe that suddenly the Dire is getting more Aegises than they did at the end of 6.84, right? It's only harder to take Roshan. Radiant has had an increased win advantage in competitive gameplay. So there's no reason to believe otherwise.
It's arguably much harder. Just in the way the pit opens up and everything, it makes it way more of a combat zone than it ever was before. Because to commit as Radiant in the old positioning, you were jammed up a lot more. It feels like, and then you'd have to enter it from right to left. And now it just opens out into the river. It's still a tactical disadvantage to fight in, but arguably, it's a lot harder to fight out as well because you're just way more open.
Now, I have a question, but just because of the buffs that have been given to him, it really started at 6.79, which I believe is the patch after TI3. Did you're a bit of our Dota 2 competitive historian. Do you know why that change was made? Was it because of were people abusing Rosh at TI3 or beforehand, or was it just too easy? Because before 6.79 it would be that Roshan would spawn every 10 minutes on the dot very consistently, right? So you could just mark in your timer when it would respawn and it would be there reliably. Did they do this to counteract a certain strategy people were using? Was it a certain meta that generated this need to change the timing on the Rosh pit and continue to add these buffs?
Well, it's been a constant complaint almost of professional players that Roshan is too easy to take. Because it back then when we started seeing serious buffs, so about 6.79, although Roshan has almost exclusively taken buffs since the beginning of Dota. But 6.79 is where modern Roshan started to kind of take shape. A big complaint had been that Roshan was way too easy to take. He did not scale well enough, and that Dire had an enormous advantage, and that was true to a point at the time. That Radiant still had a slight win advantage back then, but in terms of Aegis control, Dire had an amazing advantage. Like I said, we're talking after those changes, still more than 60% of all Aegises claimed, or 60% of all games showed all Aegises claimed by Dire. Right? That's staggering.
Mm-hmm.
He is, as a game mechanic, functionally too important at competitive levels of play to not be constantly changing. That there's always going to need to be balance attributed to him, because pros are always going to focus on making sure that they can control that objective. That's the one, unlike towers and other high ground types of objectives, Roshan is the only objective that you are competing with the other team to take, right? Mm-hmm. Because of that competition, there will always be a heavy focus on the ability to take that, not only because Aegis is such a significant advantage, but also because the team fight that comes with Roshan is usually a focal point for a game.
It's interesting that you say that, because I mentioned that Roshan was a dynamic objective, and towers are definitely stagnant ones. You're not trying to take your own tower faster than the other team is trying to take your tower. You both have towers. And so that's why even the jungle example isn't quite the same, because each team has their individual jungle, and you can fight for ancients or jungle creeps for additional gold, but it's not quite the same as having just one of something on the map that will benefit one team. Dota's usually way more, I guess it has a lot more duality in that sense, that not more... There's no other thing that there's just one of, in the sense that it gives you that type of advantage. And it's very interesting to talk about the difference just based upon positioning, because it feels like Rosh fights are more interesting now than maybe they've ever been. I don't know. I feel like he's at a good place right now. He offers the right thing to the team that wins or can sneak it, and it makes for some very interesting games.
Now, I feel like he's still going to get continuously buffed made buffed in the sense that he'll be made more difficult. Gorgon, do you think, this is a tough question, I know, when do you think we'll hit the breaking point, the critical mass, if you will, of buffs to Rosh, where he will be an objective that people really have to, that'll be a higher, like as great a risk as it is a reward from the Dire, or from both sides, not the Dire, but either side? When do you think he'll be truly balanced in the eyes of pros? Is it a certain buff that you give to his armor, or is it a increase in his damage? What if you had to be Ice Frog for a day and they're like, deal with Rosh, how do you deal with it? What would you do?
So I would argue, and this is a contentious point, but I would argue that the game is designed with that Dire side Rosh advantage built in. The fact is that the Radiant side jungle is better for farming. It's more streamlined and it's more accessible. The Radiant side middle lane has better access to neutral creeps for heroes like Shadow Fiend and other stack-dependent heroes to be able to access. The Radiant side is easier to mid-block. The Radiant side has, for the most part, better teleportation points toward their opponent's jungle and better access to opponent's jungle. The Radiant side has a lot of small advantages based on map. So when Dire was getting massive solo control back in 6.80 and before, they only won about 78% of games that they controlled every Aegis. Compared to Radiant, that they only controlled about 30 or 25% of games, but they won more than 95% every patch of games that they solo controlled the Aegis. Mm-hmm. So that advantage to Roshan did not necessarily give Dire a massive advantage. It gave them a massive Aegis control advantage, but not a massive win advantage.
It gave them an objective in their corner, but not necessarily in the entire game.
Right, but it helped to balance out some of the other issues that they hadn't had. And some of the other things that they had to their favor, the Dire side, were that it was very easy for some heroes to stack Dire side Ancients from the offlane. For example, like Alchemist could do it, Bristleback could do it. Now it's much more difficult, takes a lot more time. And you have to cut down some trees to do it. It's just usually not worth it, to be honest. Those changes have really kind of neutered Dire in a way. Radiant is a lot more successful right now. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but they are more successful and heavily preferred by most teams. So, and at a competitive level, at least. So I would argue that Roshan doesn't need to be made more difficult to take right now, because the more difficult you make Roshan to take,
the more you hurt Dire.
The more you hurt Dire, exactly. Because
Interesting.
the Radiant, the longer those fights last, the more opportunity they have to actually walk back out from buybacks, the more opportunity that they have to reinitiate, and the more opportunity that they have to catch Dire trying to sneak it. So they have 3 advantages, right, based on Rosh being harder to take. I think we'll probably see indirect buffs to Roshan, because I think a lot of the heroes that are popular right now, these negative armor heroes, will probably start taking some indirect or some direct nerfs, which indirectly buffs Rosh because you're less likely to pick these negative armor heroes, right? But in terms of direct buffs, I don't expect that we will see any. I certainly hope that we won't see any unless they are really well built into the overall patch notes.
So, Gorgon, what do you say to the guys that we've talked about, the PPDs, the FNGs of the world, who are like, this guy is way too easy to take? What do you say to them?
So my argument would be that was true in 6.78, 6.79, but that as they make Roshan less of an advantage for Dire, they need to make sure that they are not taking away all Dire's advantages. Dire needs to have additional advantages placed. So if that means reworking the Radiant jungle a little bit so that Radiant has more accessible points for dropping wards, great. And granted, that is one potential Dire side advantage. The Radiant jungle is more open, it is easier to ward, and you do have the only overlapping spawn boxes in the game on Radiant jungle, right? So that is a Dire side advantage. There are a lot of little things that differ from side to side. I really love some of the changes that they've made to Dire over the years. The fact that he carries Aegis, for one thing, he didn't always do that. That used to be an item that you could just build way back in the day. But
I've heard.
But I really like that they have increased his base armor, that they've made him scale into the late game better. I really like that they made the random countdown timer rather than just a guaranteed 10 minutes.
Yeah, I like that change as well.
It is fundamentally vital to making sure that games have breath, because otherwise the game after the first Roshan just becomes waiting for Roshan. And now teams can't necessarily justify waiting for Roshan as much. It forces a little more activity.
Nothing should ever be constant in Dota either, I feel like, too. You know, the heroes change, the map spawns change, the runes even change, So, like, to have that variability added a lot of, like you said, breadth is the best word for it. It just made more interesting situations around the pit.
So, just to go back to a point from earlier, while we were talking, I ran the numbers, and 62% of Aegises have been claimed by Dire this patch. So that is not perfect, but it is very close to the right number. So about 62%. So about a 6-to-4 ratio, which is good for Dire, but I'm willing to bet that the number of games that entails Dire getting every Aegis is even smaller than it had been in 6.84, and I'm willing to bet that the number of contested Aegises are greater.
Yeah. That's a very good... I feel like we got the physical location down really well and kind of what that represents to both teams. So, Blue, unless you have anything to add, I'm going to go ahead and close out the show. Do you have any rebuttal or anything?
No, it's
you sounded more on the side of PPD that maybe does need to be increased, so I don't know if you had anything
I just like to play the devil's advocate. It's not necessarily that I disagree. I mean, I fully agree, and I think that something that's interesting. Another point, maybe for another show that we could talk about, is the way that the game is balanced, and that that Dire loses on so many other points aside from Roshan, that Roshan has to be made still relatively easy for them to pick up. What about future changes we could discuss? Is like how would we make Dire easier? Would we change? A great suggestion you were talking about is changing the way the Radiant jungle works. Or changing the way the Dire jungle works, things like that. So just stuff for another show that, maybe we should write it down now with some talking points, but really enjoyed the talk.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. It really clarified a lot for me. So thanks for that. I am the Grand Wazoo. I'm the host, but Gorgon, let's start with you first. Where can people find you? What are your plugs, etc.?
Hey guys, you can find me at the Wonder Cow on Twitter. I don't know that I have anything particularly noteworthy coming out this week, but if I do, you will find it announced there. And if you're interested in this Roshan discussion, a lot of the stats that I pulled came from an article that I put up earlier this year on Join Dota that I'm sure the guys would be happy to link to on the site. So
yeah, we'll gladly
make
do
sure that they have a copy of that.
Thanks, man. What about you, Blue? Where can people find you?
You can find me at MrBlue22 on Twitter. You can also find, well, you won't find our lovely faces this week, but you may find them next week on
some technical difficulties for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's another show for another time.
Yeah.
But you can find us maybe next week at youtube.com/.ptv1.
Cool. And I am your host, the Grand Wazoo. You can find me at .p_wazoo, and that's pretty much it. I don't do a lot else. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for going along on this ride with us, and stay hard and stay classy, my friends.